Someone Like You by Sparkpasker. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 11. Later that night, Izuku was in the middle of pricing equipment when he received a text message. He was grateful for the distraction. He wasn't finding a lot of options. The only company he was able to find that didn't sell exclusively to heroes or to civilians that required the use of equipment for the safe function of their work was a company called Hatsume Industries. Izuku hadn't heard of them before and would have to do a lot more digging before he felt comfortable purchasing something from them. He didn't want to end up associated with a company that does shady deals. There is a company that does that already by the name of Detnerat. It's funny. They advertise they have the best equipment, but their cybersecurity is absolutely abysmal. It was already bad enough that Izuku had to purchase his shoes through Detnerat. The text message was from Ojiro. He had made a group chat between Izuku, Asui, Call Me Sue, and himself. He said his uncle had given the okay for the two of them to join Ojiro at the dojo. That was surprising, actually. Izuku wasn't exactly holding his breath for a positive response. Maybe he didn't tell his uncle that Izuku was quirkless. He knows Ojiro, and those with mutant quirks, quote-unquote, in general, seem to have a different outlook on the quirkless population. But Izuku had had too many run-ins with people who shouldn't have cared, but did, to believe it until he saw it firsthand. He responded with a thumbs up and told them he would be there the next day. Asui, Call Me Sue, gosh, he was never going to get used to that, said she would be there as well. Izuku stood in front of an older-looking dojo the next morning. Unlike many of the more popular dojos that were constructed with concrete and glass, this one was a remodeled wooden dojo. It had a few sprouts of vine growing up the side, and grunts and yells could be heard coming from inside. Izuku walked in the front door slowly. He was expecting to be kicked out as soon as he walked in, but to his surprise, he wasn't even given a side eye. Everyone was completely engrossed with their movements, controlling their bodies exactly how they wanted to. It was actually quite a mesmerizing sight, almost hypnotizing in a way. Izuku was knocked out of his head when he heard an announcement that class was over. He moved over to stand to the side of the door to allow people to leave. Now that he thought about it, it was only 7:30 in the morning. This must be a class offered to people whose only free time is early in the morning. He had to admit, even if Ojiro had forgotten to tell his uncle Izuku was quirkless, the fact that he catered to the working class made Izuku respect him. But maybe that was how everyone was. How if even people are horrible to him, they still do good things. Like, even if a police officer refuses to help him because he's quirkless, they arrest villains. Or Inko, she's still a nurse and helps heal people, even if she refuses to do the same for Izuku. But does that make them bad people with a few good traits, or good people with a few bad traits? Because Izuku is not delusional. He knows that if someone hates him for being quirkless, they also hate other people because of the same reason. And after talking with Ojiro and Asui, he knows people hate those who have mutations or even, quote, villainous quirks just as much. And some people hate all three groups equally. Could those people be called equal opportunity discriminators? Izuku's thoughts were interrupted by someone stopping next to him. He turned his head and came eye to eye with Sue. Good morning, Asui. He stopped when she stared straight into his eyes. He laughed awkwardly. I mean, Sue? Good morning, Izuku. Ribbit. Izuku blushed. He wasn't used to being called by his first name. Inko barely even did that anymore. It was almost always, hey you, nowadays. But it hadn't taken him long to learn that Sue was the type of person to get attached quickly. Once she considered you a friend, formalities kind of flew out the window. You guys made it! Izuku heard Ojiro yell as the last of the previous class walked out the door. Ojiro's hair was still wet. He must have been in the class that just finished. Izuku hadn't seen him, but there were a lot of big guys that would have blocked his view. He was followed by an older man that looked quite similar. Same dark blonde, shaggy hair, but it was long and pulled into a ponytail at the base of his neck. The loose hairs around his forehead were held back by a red headband. Welcome, he said seriously. My name is Ojiro Masaki, but you may call me Sensei. Mashiro says you two are wanting to learn how to fight? Izuku and Sue nodded in sync. I know some hand-to-hand, but I haven't actually ever had to use what I have learned, so I want to see how I could do better, Izuku explained. I don't really know much hand-to-hand, Ribbit. All I know right now is to just throw myself at my opponent, Sue responded after Izuku. You, Sensei pointed at Sue, are more than welcome to join. We specialize in working with those who have mutations and are unable to join other dojos. I will teach you how to fight to the best of your ability. Sensei then looked at Izuku. I understand you are quirkless? He's not quite asked. More like he said it as a statement, but was maybe still looking for clarification. That's right, Izuku said anyway. Mashiro says you've been denied entry to every other dojo you have tried. That's correct. And they said it was due to insurance? Yes. Well, I'm sorry to say, kid, disappointment welled up inside of Izuku. He knew this wasn't going to work, but you've been taken for a fool. What? Izuku asked in confusion. He felt like he was sitting on a cliff. The previous disappointment he felt was like an ocean churning up against the rock face and lapping at his ankles. Insurance companies don't care one way or another if someone quirkless joins a dojo. What? Izuku asked incredulously. Yeah, if someone quirkless joins the dojo and gets hurt, nothing happens. Insurance companies won't pay the claims because they should have known they were going to get hurt. And even if they try to sue for damages, no judge or court will take the case seriously for the same reason. Izuku was dumbfounded. Then why do they all blame the insurance companies? For the same reason they say the same crap to those who have mutations. Anti-discrimination laws. Those laws don't specifically apply to the quirkless population, but let's say someone high in the government had a family member that was diagnosed as quirkless, they have the power to actually sue someone for discriminating against their family member and get away with it. But if the business claims it is due to insurance, there really isn't much they can do about it because it is common knowledge that insurance companies don't want to pay for claims when something was preventable. So if a company doesn't explicitly state they don't want quirkless to be there and instead blames it on the insurance company, no one can blame them for protecting their business. It's a loophole that adults acknowledge, but no one is actually willing to change. Izuku wasn't exactly surprised. It made sense, but he didn't normally deal with businesses, not just outright stating he couldn't be there. That was what all the businesses in his neighborhood do, anyway. And the police in the area never did anything either. So Izuku wasn't aware there were any anti-discrimination laws. But the likelihood of some big shots quirkless kid coming into some small mom and pop shop near where he lived was negligible. No one was going to follow the spirit of the law in that area, only the letter. That's why he almost always has to take a train a stop or two over to go shopping. But that means that you will be a perfect addition to this dojo. Izuku felt himself mentally take a step back from the edge of the cliff. What? You've been discriminated against, the same as any other student in this dojo. Everyone here knows what it's like to be in your shoes, and I want to help you succeed in whatever you want to do with your life. Izuku smiled wide. Thank you! He bowed low at the waist. One thing to remember, though, Izuku looked at Sensei. Just because the people here have been discriminated against doesn't mean they won't discriminate against others. But discrimination is taken extremely seriously within these walls. If anyone says anything to you about while you're here, you need to report it immediately. It is not tolerated, and they will be dealt with harshly. Yes, sir. Izuku said. Good. Now I want to see how you two fight first. That way I know what it is you have to work on. Izuku motioned for Sue to follow him onto the mat. Sue took off her shoes and followed him to the center of the room. They took their stances and Sensei motioned for Sue to start. She crouched down low, then used her long legs to jump at him. She attempted to grapple with him, but he was able to slip out of her hold easily. Again and again. She threw herself at him, but he slipped away every time. After some time, Sensei motioned for Tsu to stop. She put her hands on her knees and breathed harshly. You need to work on your endurance and stamina. Towards the end, you were only about half serious because you were too tired to continue. What sources have you been using to learn how to fight so far? I've been watching videos online about how wild frogs fight, Ribbit. I figured it would be the best way for me to fight villains. You're right. That certainly would work best for your physique, and it looked like you were copying the frogs well, but their moves don't work very well on humans. I want to teach you some judo. You would be able to use the grappling moves from wild frogs in a way that would work against other humans. It would also be beneficial for you to learn something along the lines of karate or jujitsu. Yeah, if you look like a frog and fight like a frog, then no one would guess you also have another method, and it would be a big surprise for those who are not able to be taken down by your frogjitsu. Izuku said, Yeah, I practice more than one martial art myself. I started with karate, but I branched out to a bunch, and now I'm practicing my own mixed martial arts to make a martial art all my own, kind of like Gunhead. Tsu laughed. You're right, Izuku. Ojiro, I need to have more than one way to fight, Ribbit. Thank you, sir, she said, bowing to Sensei. He nodded his head. Okay, kid, you're next. Izuku removed his shoes and stepped up to take Sue's place on the mat. Sensei motioned for him to start, so he did. He ran forward and attempted to hit Sensei with a right straight. Sensei pushed his fist out of the way, so Izuku followed it up with a left kick. Sensei turned to the side to dodge. Izuku continued going through his motions. Punch, kick, roundhouse, punch, kick. Izuku wasn't even able to touch him. Whatever he tried, it was always a block or a dodge. He was beginning to become frustrated. Izuku performed a roundhouse kick, but in his frustration, he didn't notice Sensei dropped down to swipe his feet out from under him. He fell on his side and laid there, huffing. Not bad, Sensei said. You have good form and power behind it. What sources have you used to learn to fight so far? I found, Izuku panted, some videos of an undergrad here online. He took in another breath. I just copied what I saw. Well, that would explain what I saw, because you were copying what you saw in the video and never had the chance to actually spar with anyone. You developed a habit. You always have a right punch followed by a left kick followed by a roundhouse. You don't really stray from that, so you become predictable. Not to mention, you also damn near announce what move you'll be making next. You probably broke down that video frame by frame to learn the correct forms. Is that right? Izuku nodded. His breath was coming back, but he still found it hard to speak. By doing that, you learned the perfect form, but you didn't learn how to hide your next move. So we will be working on how to improvise and keep your opponents guessing. Izuku finally had enough strength to lift himself up off the floor. He returned to stand with Sue and Ojiro. When would the two of you be able to come to classes? Sensei asked. It will depend on my parents' schedule, Ribbit. Sue says they work a lot, so I have to take care of my siblings when they are not home, Ribbit. I will text Ojiro to let him know if that's okay, Ribbit. That's fine, Ojiro said. What about you, kid? I'm available every Tuesday and Thursday. Okay, then I will see you on Thursday for your first class. Thank you for this opportunity, Ribbit. Izuku and Sue said in unison. No, it's my pleasure. Just remember, I expect you all to work hard. Yes, sir, the three yelled. Good, he said with the first smile since they met him. I will turn all of you into heroes in no time. Chapter 12. Izuku stood in front of a large skyscraper. Smoke occasionally billowed out of various windows. His legs felt like jelly, and his hands were clammy and tingly. He forced himself to breathe in and out slowly. Out of everything he had done, getting a job, working out, learning to fight, all of it, this was his first real step into being a crime fighter. He took one last long look at the large sign stating Hatsume Industries and walked through the front door. After a whoosh and a blast of warm air, Izuku stood in front of a reception desk. Hello. Welcome to Hatsume Industries. Do you have an appointment? A long, straight black-haired and brown-eyed woman sitting behind the desk asked. She had a sort of traditional beauty, but if Izuku was a betting man, he would bet almost anything that she had some sort of insectoid mutation based on the clicking that came from under the desk and the slight fangs poking out from underneath her top lip. Yes, my name is Midoriya Izuku. Yes, Miss Doria, it looks like you are right on time for your appointment. If you could take a seat, I will let your escort know you are here, she said, and indicated with her hand. Thank you. Izuku turned around and saw a small sectioned off space in the lobby. He walked through the doors and was met with about a dozen chairs reminiscent of what he would see in a doctor's office or hospital, or at least what he witnessed the few times he was there. There were a couple tables breaking up the chairs with small succulents atop each one. Izuku had only been sitting down for a couple minutes before someone walked into the room. A woman in a blue suit jacket and pencil skirt looked at Izuku. Midoriya Izuku, she stated. It was pretty obvious who Izuku was. He was the only one there, after all. Izuku stood. Follow me, please. Izuku followed. Her light brown hair flowed freely behind her. They walked past the receptionist. Izuku couldn't help but peek at the woman behind the desk as he walked by. He was pleased to see the abdomen of a spider. Izuku was so happy at being right, he nearly skipped, but due to being in public, he simply walked lightly instead. Behind the desk was a hallway with rows of doors on each side. The woman slowed down to walk next to Izuku. I will have to apologize in advance. Izuku looked at her with an eyebrow raised. Why? The designer you were assigned is the daughter of the owners. She's a little eccentric. She sighed. She's an absolute genius, but gosh, is she a handful. She put a hand to her forehead and rubbed at her temple. She blew up one too many of her inventions and actually set her lab on fire. So her parents figured this would be a good time for her to actually take an order and learn a process rather than just making whatever she wants. She never thinks ahead when she invents, and I would bet nearly anything that that is what leads to most of her chaotic nature. Well, I'm sure it will be fine. Izuku thinks back to another explosive individual he had to learn to put up with. You may think so now, but if she becomes too much, just let me know, and I will try to find another designer for you. Do you say try because I'm quirkless? Something heavy sunk low into his gut. Well, many of our designers are not exactly what you would call open-minded. Although I have a feeling this is not the first time you've heard something along that line. She looked at Izuku out of the corner of her eye. He made sure to keep his face neutral, but that look probably told her more than what he necessarily wanted. They stopped at an open door leading to a corner office. Izuku poked his head inside and saw a girl about his age with pink dreadlocks and thick steampunk goggles. She laid with her head in her arms and was playing with a pencil, making doodles on a loose piece of paper. Hatsume, your next appointment is here, the escort said. Izuku stepped into the room and took a seat at the chairs across the desk from Hatsume. Welcome to Hatsume Industries. How can I help you? Hatsume asked, her voice muffled by her face being squished into her arms. Hatsume, do you even look at his request file? Hatsume sighed and pulled a file off a large pile in front of her. She laid it on her desk, opened it, and began skimming through the information. Izuku noticed a form with his personal information and reason for needing equipment. Hatsume's eyes snapped to Izuku. He jumped in his seat, but she quickly stood from her chair. You're quirkless, she said with awe. Yes, is that going to be a problem? Izuku asked. He really hoped Hatsume would join the short list of people he had met lately that didn't seem to care he didn't have a quirk. If it was going to be a problem, he was going to have to figure out how to make things himself. Based on what his escort implied, finding another designer would be impossible otherwise. It would take far too long to come up with the money for the needed equipment, not to mention storage for it, the cost of materials, learning to make the equipment, and the time required to make it. It would push back his timetable significantly. Problem? There's no problem. It's perfect. You're a clean slate. You don't have a quirk I would have to work around. You have infinite possibilities. Hatsume took both hands and swiped everything off her desk and onto the floor, including Izuku's request form. Hatsume! The escort exclaimed. Izuku saw her throw her hands in her air and storm off saying, I'm done! So, what kind of babies do you want? Izuku's brain blue screened. I'm sorry. What? What kind of babies do you want? Hatsume repeated. How about some artificial lungs? Or how about a flying car? I've always wanted to make one of those, but physics keeps getting in the way. Maybe I need to study bees more. Hatsume excitedly rambled, jotting down an idea that came to mind. It didn't take long for him to realize she meant her inventions when she said babies. No, I don't need all of that. Not that I know how to drive anyway, he mumbled the last part. Oh, Hatsume said dejectedly. Well then, what do you want? I'm looking for protective clothing, headgear, footwear, and weapons. So just basically the whole deal? Yep. Okay, so what kind of properties are you looking for in the gear? For the protective clothing, I want it to be slash-proof, stab-proof, and bullet-proof. It should also be heat and cold resistant. Well, you just want everything there, don't you? Hatsume asked with a giggle. Oh, this is going to be fun. Izuku smiled and gave a small laugh back. The footwear I want to be steel-toed, but still flexible in the rest of the shoe. I will be specializing in stealth and don't want big, clunky shoes to be giving me away. They should also be sound dampening and able to cushion falls from a high altitude. Hatsume whistled. Izuku could hear her legs bouncing from underneath the desk. The headgear should cover my hair and eyes, but I still need to have good peripheral vision. I would also like to have some sort of visor with built-in heat and night vision, if possible. I was also wondering if I could work with you to install my own operating system. Hatsume looked at him in surprise. You code? Yeah, I'm not sure how good I am, but I tinker. Then that is definitely something I can make work. Okay, what about weapons? I want something that is easy to use. When I was a kid, I made my own nunchucks out of some logs and string I had found. I got pretty good at using them too, if I do say so myself. I also thought about some eskrima rods or a staff, Those shouldn't be too hard to learn to use. The only thing is, I have no doubt I will probably lose the weapon at some point, so I need to be able to find them quickly. Maybe add a sensor or a magnet that will summon the weapon back to me? I love you already. I have so many ideas for our babies. I can at least have the shoes done in 3 days. 3 days? Yep. Come back then and we will make sure everything else or everything fit right. If it does, then you can take them home with you to try out before purchasing. Hatsume stood from her chair and walked around the desk. She pulled out a measuring tape and wrapped it around various parts of Izuku's body. He was kind of uncomfortable with having someone that close to him. Being in physical proximity to others never turned out well for him. Whereas Hatsume seemed like the type of person whose bubble of personal space was absent, and therefore didn't consider that others maybe did have one. After just a few minutes, Hatsume was finished. She leaned back to rest against her desk. Okay, all done. See you in 3 days. She quickly escorted Izuku from the room and shut the door. He heard the sound of hydraulics and cackling coming from beyond the door. A shiver traveled down his spine. He quickly left the building. 3 days later, found Izuku back at Hatsume Industries. Oh, thank God, Izuku heard when he walked through the door. He jumped in surprise. What? She has been absolutely intolerable. Just go to the room you were in before. You'll see what I mean. Izuku was apprehensive. He passed by the desk, walked down the hall, and found himself in front of the office he had met Hatsume in. As he went to knock on the door, he heard an explosion come from inside. He quickly opened the door. Smoke quickly escaped through the doorway. Izuku remembered seeing windows on the wall behind the desk and just inside the door. He quickly walked through the smoke, the neckline of his shirt over his nose to minimize the amount of smoke inhalation. Maybe he should have talked to Hatsume about making him a mouth guard of some kind with an air filter. He would mention it later. Izuku found the window. Because it was on the lowest level, it could actually be opened all the way. His escort from last time did imply Hatsume made explosions quite often. It's easier to get rid of the smoke if the window is bigger. That's probably also the reason for the corner office. More windows equals more space for smoke to leave. After opening the windows, Izuku heard fans start. The smoke quickly dissipated. What met Izuku's eyes was more than he expected. The office was much larger than he had anticipated, and he now understood what the hydraulic sound from last time was. An entire wall was gone. It had opened to reveal an entire lab hidden behind the wall. And did he mention that everything was in disarray? Because it was. There were a couple of tables towering with spare metal, cloth, and partially finished parts of projects. Some even looked singed, perhaps from past explosions. Oh, and there was also one Hatsume Mei. Izuku had discovered there was a nameplate on the door, which was not visible the last time he was here, cackling like a madman over the remnants of whatever it was that exploded. Ah, you're here, she exclaimed. I got some of the babies finished, but this visor is being temperamental. Children are just so fussy sometimes. She shook her head. I guess, he said with a strange smile. Well, here you go. She took a few items off her workstation and handed them to Izuku. Go try them on. She waved her hand at a door on the far side of the room. It had a sign on it that read, Test Room. It had a large window next to the door. That way people could observe what was happening inside. Izuku looked at Hatsume, trying to determine if she was serious or not. She had turned back to work on her exploded project. She had no clue there was anything wrong with what she had told Izuku to do. He sighed and headed for the room. Izuku opened the door and stood right on the inside of it, as far away from the window as possible. He took off his clothes and put on the outfit he had ordered. It fit perfectly, almost like a glove. It was tight enough that it wouldn't get snagged on anything, but loose enough to be comfortable and easy to move in. It was mostly black, with a few stripes of dark green and gray. It almost looked like camo, which made sense. When it's dark out, nothing is actually completely black. In reality, the dark colors we see are a combination of many different colors. If Izuku tried to go out in pure black outfit, he would stick out as much as if the outfit he was wearing was pure white. Next, he tried on the red shoes. They were flexible and breathable, but Izuku could feel the hard steel protecting his toes. He stood on his tiptoes a couple times. The shoes were new, so they had a bit of stiffness to them, but otherwise were extremely comfortable. He stepped out of the testing room. Hatsume was still tinkering with her project on the table. He didn't know what he was concerned about before. The sound of him shutting the door drew Hatsume's attention. Her head snapped in his direction. Izuku saw her eyes focus like a camera. If the action told him anything, he would bet her quirk allowed her to see further than the average human. "It looks like it fits well," Hatsume said. "Yes, it fits perfectly." "Good. The clothing is made of a Kevlar blend, woven together like chainmail on a microscopic level. That should make it at least resistant to bullets, slashing, and stabbing. It's fairly thin, so it should be flexible and breathable. I also blended it with a material that has thermal resistance and insulation." "Great," Izuku said. "As you can probably feel, the shoes are made of a similar material to protect your feet. They have a micro-thin steel toe to keep them light and strong enough to protect your toes. I have to admit that was a challenge. It's hard to make it both thin and strong enough to actually protect anything." Izuku jumped, feeling the sole of the shoes flex with his movements. "Okay, you can go ahead and change back. You can wear the shoes out so you can break them in." Izuku nodded and walked back into the testing room. He changed back into his street clothes, sans shoes. He put his new ones back on. When he walked out of the building, he would bet no one would even be able to tell the difference. As he went to leave the lab, Hatsume's head snapped back up from her project. "Oh, wait!" she exclaimed. Izuku turned back to watch as she ran towards him. "What is it?" he asked. "I forgot to show you another little something I added." Hatsume kneeled down and grabbed one of Izuku's shoes. "Hey!" Izuku yelled. He fell backwards into the wall. His hand smacked harshly against the wall to stop him from falling further. Izuku watched as Hatsume brought the shoe up to eye level. "See the pieces at the end of the shoelace?" "Yeah," Izuku said, brows furrowed. "They contain sensors that will change the color of your clothing. One shoe does your clothes, the other does the shoes and weapons. You just twist the ends," Hatsume demonstrated, "and it will change colors." Izuku watched the shoes change from the red color to orange, to pink, to yellow, to rainbow, then back to red. Izuku perked, watching the shoes change colors. That was not something he had thought of, but thought that could be extremely helpful, especially if he was trying to pursue someone. If he was made, all he would have to do is change the color of his clothes, and he would be invisible again. He wondered if he could actually manipulate the colors to literally make himself invisible. An idea popped into Izuku's head. "Wait, can you change them any color?" "You can change them in any color, correct?" "Yes, that's right," Hatsume replied. "Do you want a different color? I kind of figured red was your favorite." Izuku felt his nose clogged slightly and eyes water. He brought his fist to his mouth and coughed. "Yes, please." "Okay, what color would you like them changed to?" "Black. I hate the color red." End of chapter.